Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
The Philadelphia Eagles blew it against the Atlanta Falcons on Monday night. Also, Lamar Jackson has a hole to dig out of, and we're only 2 weeks in. And the Panthers' problem is not Bryce Young.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The Philadelphia Eagles had it on Monday night, and then Saquon Barkley dropped it, leaving just enough time for Kirk Cousins and the Atlanta Falcons to come down and score the game-winning points, a 22-21 thriller on Monday night. Louis DiBiase from Locked On Eagles joins me now. And Louis, this is an Eagles team coming off their trip to Brazil. They get a win against the Packers in week one, the extra rest. And then the offense kind of falls apart a little bit. Looks much more disjointed than we saw on Friday. Understanding A.J. Brown not out there dealing with a hamstring injury. What was the biggest difference to you between week one and week two here for Philly?
I think it was the play calling. I think Kellen Moore was a major part of the Eagles blowing this at the end of the game. I think there was a lot of suspect play calling in the red zone for all four quarters. Peter, honestly, it felt like a 2023 game where Brian Johnson and Sean Desai are calling things, and Nick Sirianni as well. So obviously Saquon Barkley drops the play that would have put the game on ice, but I think for four quarters, Kellen Moore just did not have the right game plan without A.J. Brown. I thought Jalen Hurts played phenomenally, but the coaches just, when the game was close, situationally, totally collapsed like they did last year. And I was about to talk about how this team overcame adversity 2 weeks in a row, unlike last year, and it's the complete opposite. It really feels like a game from a calendar year ago.
Okay, Jalen Hurts played phenomenally, but he did throw the game-sealing interception on the final drive.
Yeah, no, absolutely fair, and I thought it was a bad throw, but without A.J. Brown with bad play calling today, I thought Jalen was very efficient inside the pocket, has over 80 rushing yards as well. I thought he put the team on his back, and it looked better than the numbers looked for the majority of that game. Obviously, did not make the final play when he needed to, but I don't know. I would not put this one on QB1. I'm very frustrated with the coaching tonight.
Yeah, and it's hard not to be frustrated with what we saw from that defense on the final possession. I have no idea what Darius Slay is looking there on the Drake London touchdown, eyes in the backfield, and lets Drake London just go right by him. But that was like the fourth or fifth time that happened on the drive where guys are just running free. And this is after the Eagles go out in the offseason and get Vic Fangio, who is one of the most respected defensive minds in football. Mm-hmm. How did that last drive? That was so easy. How did this happen?
And that's the crazy part is they brought in Vic Fangio with the mindset of we need a veteran guy that's done this before. Last year, there were so many communication issues and coverage with a new defensive coordinator in Sean Desai, or more young and inexperienced compared to Vic Fangio. And again, it looked like the same defense as last year where Darius Slay doesn't know what he's doing in coverage. The safeties don't know the corners. But Peter, the pass rush, Kirk Cousins had all day back there. That entire drive, pretty much the entire game. Bryce Huff right now looks like one of the worst free agent signings Howie Roseman has had in a long time. It's only 2 games, but he was non-existent today. They got no pressure on a Kirk Cousins that's not even 100% coming back from a torn Achilles. So the pass rush, the lack of communication and coverage, it was a total failure in those final 2 minutes.
2 quarterback hits this week for the Eagles, a week after it looked like Kirk Cousins could not move. And it wasn't a let's test him kind of game plan. It was a let's see what he's got kind of game plan.
And Peter, the Falcons headed into this game with the second worst pass blocking grade from week one. There really was no excuse to not get to an immobile 36-year-old quarterback behind a not great offensive line. And it's just the Eagles' first round picks from Georgia on the interior, the edge rushers, they paid a lot of money. Howie Roseman's investments in that line do not look great. I don't know. Can they get Hassan Reddick back this week? I think that's something they should consider because it does not look great right now on defense when it comes to that front four.
Okay, but all this, if you're the optimistic Eagles fan, and if you find one, introduce me to him. But if you're an optimistic Eagles fan, you're like, okay, no AJ Brown. It's still early in this Kellen Moore experience, and we saw them with a healthy Jordan Love in Brazil go toe to toe with a team that we think is going to be very good in the Green Bay Packers, or at least the team I think is going to be very good in the Green Bay Packers. So can we just chalk a little bit of this up to, hey, they're just figuring this out. This is just a growing pains thing with a team that is trying to fit together a lot of new pieces here.
Yeah, I think if 2023 didn't end the way it did, people would probably be more comfortable with that take. Yeah. And I would too, because if you put this game in a vacuum, Peter, I totally agree with that. And they're, again, one Saquon Barkley drop away from being 2-0. So yes, this is a completely different team than last year, but a lot of that core, the spine of this team is the same, including your head coach. And it just felt... Yeah, you're probably right, but it felt way too familiar to last year to right now in the moment, just 5 minutes after the game ended, to probably feel that way. Maybe tomorrow and the next day I'll feel more rational about it. And yes, they are 1-1. The sky's not falling. AJ Brown will be back next week, but they play a good Saints team that scored over 90 points in 2 weeks, so they got to get things right now.
Stay up to date on the Philadelphia Eagles all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Eagles on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, the Ravens are in a bind and Lamar Jackson is the only one who can fix it. Before we get to that, the 49ers are losing playmakers at an alarming rate. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 2nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a base YouTube TV plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. For that $5 bet, you can take a look at some early Week 3 lines in the NFL. Thursday night has Aaron Rodgers against the New England Patriots. Too bad it's not Rodgers against Brady, right? Gerard Mayo has New England looking better than expected, but FanDuel not buying it. The Jets and Aaron Rodgers favored by 6.5. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The 49ers are already going to be without Christian McCaffrey for multiple weeks. Now Deebo Samuel will also miss significant time.
All right, the news of the day, Croc, on Monday is now that Deebo Samuel is out. And it looks like he's going to miss a couple of weeks with a calf strain. So calf's doing a number on the San Francisco 49ers offense right now. Not headed for IR, though, but according to Kyle Shanahan, a couple of weeks. And Deebo got hurt late in the game. You could tell he was a little bit banged up during the game. He left the game. He came back and he was on the field and was involved in the final drive of the game. So Deebo hurt late, calf injury. He's going to be out now a couple of weeks. So no Christian McCaffrey, no Deebo Samuel. 49ers 1-1, and they will be without those guys for at least a couple more weeks now. Deebo was a big part of the offense, right? I think, Jordan Mason's the big story offensively. He's been over 100 yards rushing in both of these games, but Deebo Samuel's been the 49ers' leading wide receiver.
The Texas Longhorns lost their starting quarterback and may have gotten better. Steve Sarkisian said nothing will change with the Texas offense under Arch Manning. It's hard to argue considering Texas Memorial Stadium was rocking with Manning, and the Longhorns jumped up to #1 over the Georgia Bulldogs.
I'll say this, I've been there for Bijan and a whole bunch of players, bro. That stadium gets loud when Arch comes in. So, it was, there was a collective gasp when Quinn went down. But the two plays, about 5 minutes later when Arch came in, that stadium was rocking like it was an earthquake.
Ahead of a huge Big Ten matchup with USC, as weird as that is to say, Michigan is making a change at quarterback.
Alex Orji, kind of surprisingly, I say this surprisingly, I'll explain why in a moment, named the starting quarterback against USC. I think that's surprising because I didn't anticipate. I was talking to some colleagues before the press conference today, and I said, do you think that we're going to hear anything? And they were like, no, why would Sharon Moore even say it? So that kind of tells you that they're going to put the full force behind Alex Orji because he says, hey, he's going to be the starting quarterback. He's going to go forward. It's going to be all him. So I think that is interesting because obviously that means that he's going to have the full week with the ones. Everything is going to be geared behind him. Everything that he says they had everything installed as far as offensively is what the types of stuff he would run. But that means that they can hone those things this week. They can figure out what kind of passes work best for him and what kind of run plays. So this is welcome and encouraged news.
No good team over the last few seasons has pulled a defeat out of the jaws of victory quite as often as the Baltimore Ravens. It seems like the only way they lose is in games that they were sure to win in the fourth quarter. On Sunday, it was a 26-23 loss to the Las Vegas Raiders, 13 fourth quarter points at the hands of Gardner Minshew. Kevin Ostreicher from Locked On Ravens joins me now. And Kevin, what is it about this team where they just, even with the run game that we know they have, Derrick Henry, 18 carries, 84 yards and a touchdown, they cannot put these teams away. Why not?
Yeah, and we've heard this narrative a bunch, Peter, but they just don't feel like they have an identity on offense right now. They bring in Derrick Henry on a big money contract, at least for running back standards. And while they use him well on that first drive of week one, you kind of abandoned that throughout the course of that game. And then in week two, you saw them trying to really get that going later in the third quarter into the fourth. But then they kind of abandoned it there as well. And obviously there are a bunch of different reasons. One of the biggest ones being their offensive line, which has just been outside of Tyler Linderbaum and Ronnie Stanley. They lost their other three starting spots. They've replaced those guys with other veterans that, are, like a fourth year player, potentially like a Daniel Faalele is actually in his third year, but it's guys like that where you don't necessarily go the veteran route with these spots. You thought they could, but instead it's a third-year player. Well, then it's a second-year player. And then you have a vet in Patrick McCary, but then you also are rotating him with a rookie. And your third-year player is actually a tackle that is playing at guard. And it's just like it's all these things where Lamar Jackson can't go through his reads properly. The rushing lanes are not there. There also, John Harbaugh had a rough day challenge-wise on Sunday. Two pretty obvious calls that wouldn't have gone their way. He wastes two timeouts, the second half one being the biggest one. It just feels like on every level there is just some level of, a miscue or something that doesn't go their way. And against the Las Vegas team that, look, the Ravens are better than the Raiders, but the Raiders played better than the Ravens on Sunday. And that's to the tune of the Raiders had 3 penalties. The Ravens had 11 penalties. Not all of those were honestly real good penalties, but again, you can't have that many penalties and expect to win the game. So they need to figure it out because it is certainly sloppy football right now.
One thing that stood out to me in watching this game, especially at the end, is Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers were the offense for the Las Vegas Raiders. And the Baltimore Ravens just don't have, right now anyway, any pass catchers who tilt the field, who move the needle the same way that those guys do. If it's 3rd and 6, if it's 3rd and 8, you can play the, F it, Devontae Adams down there somewhere kind of thing, and you can get a play. Gardner Minshew almost literally did that with Brock Bowers. He's rolling to his right and just heaves the ball down. Brock Bowers finds it. It doesn't feel like the Ravens have that sort of playmaker right now. Zay Flowers could be that. Mark Andrews used to be that. They hoped Rashad Bateman could be that. And yet here we are wondering if it's 3rd and 8, where do the Baltimore Ravens go other than, hey, Lamar, please bail us out?
Yeah, it's a real question because obviously Zay Flowers was the big target getter in this game on Sunday with 11. And the thing that I see with this offense is they need to move the ball more vertically. It feels like they're trying to get a bit too cute with screens and trying to get things going and the short-ish passing game. But they just need to take some deep shots down the field. Go get a 30-plus yard completion. Go get a 40-plus yard completion. But to your point, Peter, it's like, who's going to be that guy? Rashad
The
Bateman's
problem
had
is on 3rd and long, it's Nelson Aguilar, and you're going, okay, is this really the best play that you have on 3rd and 10 is to just chuck it to Nelson Aguilar deep?
Yeah, and that was one of those plays. Try to get a touchdown on a deep shot, and Nelson Aguilar is not necessarily the guy that I personally want in that situation. So Mark Andrews has been as reliable as ever over the course of his career, but it's been a very slow start for him this season. Isaiah Likely came back down to earth after a strong week 1. And even Zay Flowers made his opinions known on social media after the game, reposting a tweet that said that they kind of abandoned using him in the second half. So certainly not all sunshine and rainbows here in Baltimore, Peter. An 0-2 hole is one that you got to climb your way out of. And now they're going to Dallas to face against a very upset and angry Dallas team that's got embarrassed on their home turf. So if they fall into an 0-3 hole, some very real conversations have to be had. But honestly, we're already having real conversations in Baltimore.
We are. And this does feel like a must win, Kevin, because it's not just at Dallas this week. Then you got home for Buffalo, at Cincinnati. I mean, you are facing down, if you're the Baltimore Ravens, the very real possibility of starting this season 0-5 if you don't pull yourself out of this funk a little bit.
You need to at least win 2 of the next 3, and that's a very tall task. I mean, you mentioned it. It's not like, and especially for the offensive line, we've talked about this here, where, Chris Jones is off the docket for you, Max Crosby is off the docket for you, but you have Micah Parsons staring you right in the face this upcoming week. Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, the next week after that, Trey Hendrickson, the next week after that. This does not get any easier, especially because, look, some of the downfalls of being a good team in a previous season is that first place schedule takes no prisoners, and the Ravens are now facing that reality. So they have no time to dilly-dally, no time to experiment. They need to get the ship right here, or else, look, in what's expected to be a very competitive AFC down the stretch, they might be in trouble.
Stay up to date all year on the Baltimore Ravens by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Ravens on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the Panthers' problems are deeper than who is at quarterback. Carolina Panthers announced they were benching Bryce Young yesterday. On Locked On Panthers, our host Julian Council sees this as a far bigger problem than who is starting at quarterback.
Adam Schefter of ESPN.com tweeted this out, saying the decision to bench former number 1 overall pick Bryce Young is said to have come from head coach Dave Canales, general manager Dan Morgan, and executive vice president Brant Tillis. As one source said, Dave Canales' first big boy decision. Does anyone believe that to be true? Does anyone believe that David Tepper and his wife, Nicole, who fell in love with Bryce Young during that dinner in Tuscaloosa where they asked Bryce Young, take us through your daily routine leading up to game day. And he went through every single minute, second, and hour leading all the way up to Saturday game time in Tuscaloosa or wherever they were playing in the SEC. And right then and there, they were in love. You really think that David Tepper, who had to sign off on them going into number 1 overall, who wanted to clearly be number 1 overall so that the entire NFL world would be focused on the Panthers for once in his time here for a month straight, really 2 months straight, because that was on March 10th back in 2023 when they made that decision. He wanted all the attention on him, on his franchise, on the Panthers. That's why he went to number 1. Because of his ego, and also because he has no patience when it comes to quarterback development and roster building since having taken over here in Carolina. And this is just another example of just how unserious this organization is, whether it's right or wrong to bench Bryce Young, because there's plenty of reasons to not do it and to do it. Like, to do it because he's been awful. Like, the offense is inept, and it's not like it's just this year. I talked about last week, we can't just look at this in a vacuum. When someone like Jordan Matthews says it's not a continuation, yeah, dude, it is for a lot of people that have been here and a lot of guys actually on the roster who have continued to lose throughout their entire tenure with the Carolina Panthers. What we had seen from Bryce looked a lot like last year, but also worse than last year. So there are reasons why to make this decision and also reasons why not to. Like, you invested a ton, you brought in a new head coach, brought in all these weapons, maybe give it a little bit more time to see, like, truly, is it something you can salvage? But they cut bait. And just how this has worked out, whether right or wrong, just shows just how unserious Carolina Panthers organization is under David Tepper. He's clearly the one who wanted Bryce Young, and he's clearly the one after 2 weeks who decided, nope, seen enough. I'm pissed off. We got to make a change. Bring in the red rifle. It's Tepper, man. It ain't Dave. It ain't Dan. It ain't Brant. It's David Tepper. He's the problem and will continue to be the problem here in Carolina, and why I have no hope for this organization to ever be anything other than an unmitigated disaster, because he has no clue what he's doing.
Yeah, the Panthers don't have a good roster. What else is new? This is what happens when you are the number one overall pick, though the Panthers traded up to get Bryce Young. The problem isn't that Bryce Young just looks overmatched because the talent around him. Bryce Young looks overmatched because he's too small, because he's not athletic enough to do the things he did in college, because he doesn't have the arm strength to do the things he did in college. There are physical, real-world limitations beyond who's at left tackle or who his starting receiver is. And don't think that it doesn't matter that they gave up all this draft capital to get him. Don't think that it doesn't matter that the team could have taken CJ Stroud and didn't. Don't think that it doesn't matter that they traded away the pick that became Caleb Williams, even though Caleb Williams does not look like the great next anything at this point. All of those things are part of this. And there's a new head coach, a head coach that was not part of the decision-making that led to Bryce Young. That makes it easier for new coach Dave Canales to say, we're making a change. Yes, the circumstances around Bryce Young were bad. Bryce Young was worse. This had to happen. This was all-time bad, and it's going to go down as one of the worst trades. One of the worst trades in the history of the sport. It's one of the worst trades in any sport in the last 30 years, not just because what they gave up to get Bryce Young, but because they could have had CJ Stroud. And finally, Oakmont is going to be even tougher as the men's U.S. Open returns next summer for a record 10th time. The club, just north of Pittsburgh, has restored more than 24,000 square feet of green surface over the last 2 years as part of a renovation guided by golf course architect Gil Hance. Ground Superintendent Mike McCormick said the greens are the number one defense on the course. This is, of course, the country club that says they slow the greens down when the U.S. Open comes. That's the way the membership likes it. As someone who has played the course, it's one of the best 120s I've ever shot. Probably the best. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, which 0-2 team will make the NFL playoffs this year? By the way, I think I shot like 112 at Oakmont. So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.